Welcome to the Ancient Way podcast, where we discuss what it looks like to live as a Gentile following a Jewish Messiah. Put simply, we want to help others rediscover an ancient way by embracing the Jewishness of Jesus. We're glad you're here. Well, welcome everyone to episode 4 of the Ancient Way podcast, where Jim and I are your hosts talking about how Jesus is Jewish and figuring out together what it means to live a life as a Gentile steeped in Jewish practices as we just understand and navigate the Jewish roots of our faith. So we have been talking for the last few episodes about the Sabbath and how we kind of stumbled upon it and how that practice has begun to shape our lives. And in the most recent episode, started going through just questions that we've run into or friends have asked us. And so we're going to pick up where we left off and continue talking about the Sabbath. Jim, how's that sound?
Sounds great. I actually have a topic that you and I have not discussed before.
Great.
That it's exactly what we're doing, in the sense of figuring out within the context of a Gentile background, figuring out how to do this. And so I live in South Florida, and it like 8:30, it was just becoming dusk. And I was saying, this is ridiculous. We really look forward to Erev Shabbat, the thing on Friday where it starts, because that to me is like the Flintstones when they grab that bird's tail and it screeches. It's like it's over.
Yes.
And it's, I actually love the life I'm living now. I don't need it to be over, but entering into that weekend is still a prized moment in my soul. So, I said, how do you start Shabbat at 8:30 at night? And it was like dark at 9, but I'm guessing the sunset was listed at 8:30. Whatever they listed at, it was pretty light at 8:30. It was like dusk basically. And I can remember mowing my lawn trying to make it to Shabbat, and then I was trying to stretch what dusk was. But now I had the reverse thing. I was like, all right, set already. And I said, so what do they do in Alaska when it's light for 6 months, or the North Pole and dark for 6 months? You have a Shabbat once a year. Like,
right.
They have to pick an arbitrary, albeit realistic time to say, this is Shabbat, sun or no sun. We can't live by the standard rules. And I think with daylight savings time and living close to the equator, such as I do, the swing between winter and summer is dramatic. Like in New York, it could be dark at 4:30, like dark at 4:30. And so if you were a Sabbath observer, which so many programmers in Manhattan are, when they get hired, one of the questions you ask in an interview, an IT interview in New York, is, are you a Sabbath observer? Because this person's leaving at 3.
Is that a legal HR question? That's my first.
It's not. It is and it isn't. It is not, because I have no business asking anything about your religion. On the other hand, if you're a Saturday Sabbath observer, like, they can't say, are you Jewish? That just can't.
Right.
But I need to know if you're a Saturday Sabbath observer, and on Fridays you'll be leaving every day at 3. I need to understand this before I sign on the dotted line. Do they get hired? Well, absolutely, all the time. But it's upfront. We all understand that Moishe is leaving at 3 o'clock, period.
Yep.
No ifs, ands, or buts. No workaholic manager demand they finish this or that before. No, it's 3 o'clock, party's over. This boy's on a train on his way home. And so in New York, you could be dark at 4:30. Here, you could be dark at 8:30 at night in the summer. And so you and I have a mutual friend, Chris. He lives in Saskatchewan. And I said, Chris, I told him this whole story. I said, what do you do? Like, he said, it can get dark here at 11 o'clock at night.
Whew,
and I said,
crazy.
So I said, you're not doing the candles and the wine at 11 o'clock at night with the kids praying over the missus. What do you do? He said, it's a common problem here. People will arbitrarily decide Shabbat starts and ends at 6 or 5. 5 or 6 is pretty much
right.
the way. He does something pretty interesting. They have Shabbat. They start Shabbat at 5 or 6. I don't know which one it was. But he says, I still feel free to work till 11 though.
That's great.
I said, who wants to work after they do that initial thing?
Yeah, exactly.
He says, I don't always, but inside I have the freedom that if I didn't finish the lawn, I can get on my tractor and finish the lawn. Like I don't feel compelled to not work, or let's say get on the internet and buy this or that. I have till 11 o'clock. And in reality, both he and I'm guessing you too, on Saturday when Shabbat is over at sundown, I'm not whipping out the work to get involved with. I'm Shabbating all day.
Right.
And I even tried to justify, well, that's nonsense. I'm a Western person, in a worldwide perspective. I'm a Western Christian. I'm not doing Shabbat on Friday. That's nonsense. I'm doing it on Saturday. And for me, I didn't feel like the Holy Spirit wanted any part of that. It was like, no, I said, this is the Sabbath, keep it holy. I didn't say modify it by your culture. I said,
Right.
This is the Sabbath, keep it holy. Okay, fine. So I went back to Fridays, and officially it's over at sundown. If I
So
always
you end
find
at
up,
sundown on Saturday?
well, I kind of Shabbat is officially over for me on sundown. I'm not about to start any project on Saturday night.
Right.
It's not going to happen. On the other hand, if the whole day was bugging me that I really need to get on Amazon and buy this, I will buy it after sundown on a Saturday. And
Right.
I'm free. The rules are gone, but the lifestyle's intact. Is basically the way I do it. So my whole point in this conversation is to say, what do you think of this? What do you think of saying Shabbat is Friday, whether the sun is up or not? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because where my head immediately goes is like there's a distinction, I think, of what like is written in scripture, like in the Torah, versus other rabbinic writings about
Uh-huh.
like what is the actual time. And I mean, I land ultimately, I think where you and Chris are landing, where the verse we read at the end of Genesis 1, the beginning of Genesis 2, where it says there was evening and morning the first day. And so that's where like it starts at sundown came from. It's like that through Jewish history has been when the day starts. So I just adopt that. And I think from there, like in the examples that you're giving about, well, what happens if sundown is super late? I feel pretty flexible there. It would be really difficult for us with little kids to like wait to start Shabbat until 11 p.m. It's just impractical. And I feel like there's a way, wherever you fall on the spectrum, that if you start it earlier, the rule to the T is don't light a candle on like the next day. So if like sundown's at 11 and you started at 5 or 6, great, you know, and you follow the halakhic law to a T, you'd be good there. And I like to start it around probably 5:30 or 6 with our family and end around 5:30 or 6 on Saturday. And that rhythm's really worked. I find it interesting too, what Chris was saying about not feeling guilty about like finishing up some work afterwards, because I've actually done that a few times where it's like it's getting late here, dusk isn't until 8:30 like you were saying, and I've tried to like sneak it in, but I felt like every time I did that, it didn't feel right in my soul for me. And I felt like I was like that moment of when we say, Blessed are you, Lord, who sanctifies the Sabbath, that's like the demarcation of the rest of the week to Shabbat. And I feel like if I'm working after that, it's like my head's not in the right space. So I'm not super legalistic about it, but I would say 9.5 times out of 10, once we sit down to eat, do Erev Shabbat, it's like Sabbath has begun.
Well, for me, So a rabbi, a Hasidic rabbi, would not be impressed with our perspectives. Like he,
Right.
in my, as far as I understand, they say, "Yeah, I'm sorry, the sun is the sun. It's up, it's down. You don't get to decide." And I respect that, and I honor it.
Well, but even there, it's like, is it when, like, I could see them making an argument around, is it when the sun is up or down in Israel? Like, is it where you are today? Like, how do you, aren't there some differences even in that interpretation?
So it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah.
It's sundown somewhere. Uh, um, well, I feel like I needed to mention that thing about rabbis. I'm happy to respect their take on it and how they teach and how it is in the Jewish community. I do feel as though I'm not bound to the law. I know that they, if there are Hasidic Jews in the North Pole or Alaska, there's a place called Irkutsk in Russia. It's potentially or arguably the coldest place on earth. There is a community of Jews who have been so oppressed elsewhere in Russia, they collected in a place nobody would want to live so they could finally be left alone from the oppression they knew. But they're likely to be the folks with 6 months of a very narrow day, 6 months of a very broad day. And they would have to have had to come to terms with it in some sort of practical, manageable, to me, it's if you when you as soon as you're in that terrain, it's more important that it's weekly than it is the sundown. Like it just
Hmm.
they would have to
No.
have come to some terms. So if
Yeah.
that's legal, well, here I am in similar, not so extreme terms where or Chris not wanting to start at 11 o'clock at night. I feel like it's legitimate.
Well, here, I just looked it up while you were talking,
You're a
and I
good.
think this is really helpful. And then I have some more commentary.
Okay.
So apparently, this was a question. I literally looked up, when does Shabbat start in Alaska? And there are several references to what different rabbis kind of decreed and wrote about this. So there's one, it says, in the North Pole, one should use the times for Shabbat and davening based on the location where they came from. So if you're from Florida, you move to the North Pole, you go with what traditional time was in Florida. Another rabbi says that when the sun is above the horizon for 24 hours or it's completely dark, 6 a.m. is considered sunrise and 6 p.m. is considered sunset. So it's interesting to me, even reading that's kind of where, like, what we're talking about, where like Chris and you and I have
Yeah.
kind of landed,
Yes.
is like the 6-ish mark.
Right.
And then they even make, Shabbat begins 18 minutes before 6 p.m. on Friday, ends at 7:12, 72 minutes after the replacement sunset at 6 p.m. So
I think
that's
it's
interesting.
legitimate and it's intelligent.
Right. And it's
But
like practical.
Here's what I think the flip side is. And I have no judgment in this for you or Chris or anybody, but in my opinion, if you're standing before the Lord and saying, I'm honoring Shabbat because of you, 6 to 6 is workable. I can't cut myself slack to work after I told him Shabbat started for me here. Because that's like, yeah, I'm married. I have a girlfriend, but I'm married. It's
Totally.
like, no, if you made the deal, you made the deal. It's I'm sorry. You can't really have it both ways.
Yeah.
And
No, I agree with you on that. And I think that's the part where I was wrestling with that, where I tried it a few times and it just felt wrong, felt off. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. And I think that's in line with what you're saying. So for clarity, I don't do that anymore. It's like we start Shabbat and Shabbat it started.
Yeah. Yeah. And normally I wouldn't even have said it, just not to judge another man's life. But if we're having the discussion, I think it bears, it's worth saying that I feel like I feel like if you make this deal, then the deal is binding. It's not like flexible.
Right.
This is my deal of convenience, but it's the minute it's inconvenient, I'm going to violate it because you didn't call me this anyway, right?
Right.
It's like, no, no.
Well, what I think about in like this whole example is when Yeshua is, he healed a man on the Sabbath, and the religious leaders got all up in arms because he was
Right.
doing, quote, work on Shabbat. And, this is what a lot of people will use to say, well, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, so it doesn't matter. But I like that context that Yeshua talks about, because he's basically saying this Sabbath, this Shabbat is a gift for you,
Right.
and it's in your best interest to not work on it. So in
Yes.
that specific example, are we like truly resting if we're trying to get around the like official start and end time, or are we really surrendering our need to do work on a day or to get things done because we feel like we're not going to have time to finish it, or it's so pressing we have to do it now? So to me, it's like a good reminder of like, what's the posture of my heart on this day? And I feel that's very much in line with what Yeshua talked about.
Yeah. I I really don't like the idea of making it convenient because I feel like I don't want to insult the Lord.
Yeah.
However, I do want to make it doable. And I know that if that grace is available for somebody in the North Pole, I mean, how many of Santa's elves are Jewish anyways? Is anyone even living this? But how i- if someone's had to be intelligent about it and say, okay, this is really not workable here. What are we going to do? I'm sure that there are many um, conservative Jews here in South Florida say, no, it's 8:30. It's 8:30.
Right.
That's it. Um, I don't feel constrained to the letter of the law. I do feel constrained to give the Lord the Sabbath he's asking for, including a Friday night and a Saturday day. Um, but this is to me an intelligent, if I'm free from the rigors of the law, but I'm after following the heart or the spirit of the law in doing this, then I feel like the 6 to 6, as long as I'm going to honor it, and there is the converse here. What happens when the sun has set it for in New York and you're doing 6 to 6?
Hmm.
Then you really are working on the actual Sabbath. How does that work? I don't know. Uh,
Yeah.
I know from, you know what? Everything I've done in this has been an experiment. Every single step I've taken trying to adopt a Hebraic understanding of a Christian faith has been trial and error. This sounded right. I tried. Well, it didn't fit. That,
Right.
whatever. I used to go to restaurants that were very busy because they were working whether I was there or not. I was paying for something, which is bogus, really. So I stopped, and very recently, I tried to buy a ceviche on Fridays and put it in the refrigerator so it's there on, because it sits in lime juice. It's only getting better in
Right.
my refrigerator. And I walk up at lunchtime, pull out this fabulous fish lunch that somebody else made that I took no work. It's like perfect, but I just couldn't get there on Friday. So Tina and I went and ordered ceviche on Shabbat and then sat out in this patio by ourselves under the trees, eating this gorgeous Latin fish.
Hmm.
I felt very Shabbat-y. It was so chill. It was
Shabbat-y.
so pleasant. I did spend money for it. I was in a restaurant. We drove. There was lots of violations in that, if we're going to go technical. But in my soul, it just was lovely.
That's great. I have two thoughts on this. One is like kind of like what you were describing, where it's been an experiment and you've got some things right, you've changed some other things, you realize this wasn't life-giving. I think that's the important part, because in like it parallels with my own journey, where we can get so like rigid and stuck on, are we doing the right thing, that we miss the spirit of it. But then
Yes.
the other part of that is, well, the Holy Spirit lives within us, and
Amen.
scripture says that he's going to guide us in all truth. And I just believe that if I'm doing something that's like not quite off, or maybe it's not like life-giving to my soul, that God's going to reveal that to me and impress it upon me the same way that you're kind of describing. And I think that's important to bring up for people who, maybe they're just getting into Sabbath for the first time,
Yeah.
because you can get so fixated on it and then it can suck all the joy out of it. But then, like you're saying, you get to this moment where you realize, yeah, I'm not going to buy anything on Shabbat anymore. And
I don't.
that's really good. But it's like that was a journey that God had to take you through to get you to that point.
Oh my
So,
God. And it was laden with compromise and
right.
justifications. It was just disgusting. Like, I'm like, what? I'm sitting, I'm pressing a button. So I bought something. It's like, but it's just the idea of I can shop 6 other days. Couldn't I just part with money and the whole thing
Right.
on one day if that's what he's asking?
Totally.
And I honestly, I feel like if there were conservative Jews in our audience, they might be like writing us all kinds of, how could you even think this is Shabbat and da da. And
Totally.
I honestly feel judged because of the freedom I find in Christ vis-a-vis these very law-oriented things that we're embracing. But I have to be true to my own heart and the Lord, and find peace there. So,
Right.
you like you've gone camping. Did you ever start a fire by yourself, like just with sticks or
Yeah.
whatever?
Yeah. This would be very much contested if I
So
were a
right.
Hasidic person.
I mean, that is a ton of work. And
Right.
when it says don't light a fire, that they were speaking to people who lighting a fire was that
Right.
every day, like that
Versus
back and
like
forth with the.
lighting a lighter and
I'll walk out to my I walk out to my barbecue. So if I do a barbecue the right way with coals, that's work. With the chimney and
totally.
fine. I'll give you that. No, there's no contest there for me. But I also have a gas grill. So I walk out, I push ignite, it's on. I'm not feeling like that's work. Did I light a fire? Yes,
Right.
I did. But
Well, and if you took that to the extreme too, like is flipping your light switch considered work because you're activating electricity, which is similar to fire?
I think we've had this exact conversation in a previous
Probably.
episode. But I do remember I was at Doris's Italian market, and there was this woman talking to me with a cigarette sticking out of her mouth, and while it was really like in the middle of her mouth, and she's talking like this. Excuse me, sir. I said, yeah. She says, will you light my cigarette, please? She wanted me to light her cigarette because she was a Sabbath observant and wouldn't light a fire and
Hmm.
wouldn't work to raise the lighter to her face and ignite this cigarette. So I did it for her. I'm thinking, no, 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 and no. That cannot be what my father had in mind when it came up with Shabbat.
Totally.
Accosting strangers on a sidewalk to do this work for you to support your habit. No, I lit it obviously, and but I don't want to be that. I don't want to be like my friend does interior work in houses, and he was in someone's house on Friday with this stipulation that he had to be gone by sunset. And the guy was ripping off squares of toilet paper and stacking them next to his toilet. And he looked up and the guy is like, what? He says, I'm getting ready for Shabbat. He wouldn't pull a piece of toilet paper off a roll. It had to be, but he's still going to use it, which is just as more work than pulling a roll. But he was so hooked up in the letter of the law that he wouldn't even. And I said, like, that's not what my father meant.
No. He said,
and
yeah,
I'm struggling to find where is the place he meant, and how can I honor that and worship his name by
right.
aligning with that, and how do I not do that other business? So
I I've got, well, two other things I'll mention here. I think one is when you look at even the command to keep the Sabbath, to remember it, to keep it holy and set apart. Like the language you hear all throughout the Old Testament in Scripture is that sorry, just blanked on it. Um, that it's set apart. So basically, you don't do any ordinary work,
right,
and Right. So to me, it's like that's really helpful. It's like I'm not going to go to work like I do every other day of the week. I'm going to treat meals differently. I'm going to change how I do commerce and purchasing things. And it's very like open-ended. There's not like the restrictions that we hear about are not in the Torah.
Right.
It's not. And so I think that's intentional. And obviously, there's things that even we're talking about that we've kind of done to where we've realized, like, oh, we're not operating in that spirit of that command, that Sabbath command. And we figured that out. That's very similar to what the, Jewish rabbis have done for centuries. But I think going back to, well, what did God actually say? What was the commandment is really helpful and life giving. And then the second thing that I think is really freeing for me, because when we first started getting into Sabbath, we had a lot of these questions, and there's a lot of different voices saying what you should and shouldn't do, and it can feel very like oppressive, where you're just worrying all the time, are we getting it right? And I think it's good to remember that when you look at the church in Acts, this was this moment where these like rituals and rhythms that were reserved for the Jewish people, God is now opening his spirit up to Gentiles and people who may or may not have had been aware of these other practices. And so Paul, when he starts writing these letters, like there's a letter in Colossians where he's specifically addressing, don't let anyone judge you by like what you eat or drink. Don't let them judge you by whether you keep the new moon festival, Rosh Chodesh, or your Sabbath times. And it feels very much like what we're talking about, where you've got all of these differences in opinions and cultures that are now basically taking on the identity of Yeshua, this Jewish Messiah. And it was probably causing a lot of division of what do you do? What should you do? Like we see this in Acts 15. And so his like writings are really helpful. It's like don't let anyone judge you. These are a shadow of the things to come. Let everyone be convinced in his own heart. And that feels kind of like what we're wrestling with, what we're talking through today.
You may know the exact address. I don't. Paul says, if you come to however you come to the Lord, stay that way. If you came to the Lord as a Jewish person, preserve your Jewish way of life. If you're a Gentile, stay a Gentile. No one's asking you to become
Right.
Jewish. And that is the absolute foundation of why I'm willing to embrace my Hebrew roots without trying to become directly aligned with rabbinic teaching.
Right.
I stick to the Torah, and that's it. And there are those who would judge that as being not enough, but I also feel like I'm aligning with what Paul said. It's like I came as a Gentile. I don't claim Jewish heritage, genetic heritage. I'm grafted into Israel, but I'm not Israeli. Like I'm not. So fine. How do I do it?
Well,
And that's
well, that is
exactly what
another
I'm doing
thing we
here.
could probably talk about. Are you? If you're grafted in, do you become part of the same tree? Part of the root?
In heaven's eyes, yes, absolutely. Um, uh, like I did genetic testing and discovered that much to my surprise, I was 20% Ashkenazi Jew, and my Jewish friends said, "Yeah, no one's going to respect that. You might as well not even say it."
Right.
So, so I don't feel you have to be impressed with a culture that preserved their identity 2,000 years without a country. I mean, that's just, it's the miracle working of God,
Right.
really. But still, these people, these Jews today, were part of this remarkable thing to preserve their identity all this time. So I respect how fiercely they guard their boundaries. Like, my daughter, she's not going to date a Gentile boy, period. Like I get that. But if you are a believer in Yeshua, their Messiah, in my opinion, um, then I am part of that community somehow, some way, and certainly in heaven's eyes. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's hard. That's very
Well,
hard.
in that, Paul talks about how uh, Yeshua is making one new man, right?
Yes.
Like combining the Jewish people and the Gentiles and creating one new person in himself. And I find that interesting too. Um, yeah, because what are the implications of that? And for a Jewish person to retain all of the halakhic law is one thing, but then what does it mean for me as a Gentile? And we could argue some of that, maybe we will at some point. But I just love, for me, I always come back to the fact that, like, knowing that Yeshua participated in these practices and, like, me identifying myself in some way, while it's not perfect to the letter that, like a Hasidic Orthodox Jew might hold themselves to, I find a richness and beauty in, like, recognizing that where I am today as a believer in Yeshua comes from this long-standing tradition, and I don't know,
Yes.
it's life-giving.
Yes. I don't know that the Messiah himself felt constrained to do it the way the rabbis wanted it done. Well,
Right.
that's silly. It's not that I don't know. I do know that he didn't. So at some point, that's an invitation to a Gentile believer to embrace the spirit of the law and not be hooked up in the letter
Right.
of the law, because it's not what he called us to anyway. And all the, you know, I was raised a Roman Catholic. Guilt is a specialty of mine. And I really could fall prey to my own sense of, oh my God, that's not right.
Right. Same.
And it could be, honestly, it could be a bit tormenting, but I've had to become, let me say, militant about embracing my Father's heart, living after a way that blesses him, and stopping there and calling it enough, like it or not.
Yeah.
And I think for any Gentile embracing Hebrew ways, that's the path of salvation. That's the path. I don't mean salvation like heaven, hell salvation. I mean like how you can do this and win and not be crushed by it.
Right.
And it's possible making errors that the Lord would rather see done differently, but it's a one step at a time thing.
Right. Well, that kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier. Like, if you're doing something that's off or not, right, I think the Spirit will guide you into the right way, and he'll start to put his finger on something that you might need to change. And I mean, he's already done that just by what you've shared.
Yeah, and we've talked about often on camera. We've talked about like my wife is not a Sabbath observer, but she is on Fridays because she likes it. Actually, she's not on Saturdays because she'd rather go shopping. But I have to get more of that. Like I pray over her every Friday. I just would like to embrace more of that gorgeous Hebrew way of honoring family and honoring marriage, and just embracing the beauty of the life God has given us. I know that I'm leaning in that direction. I'm just not where I'd like to be yet. But that's
what does that look like? Like, what would you do differently based on what you're saying?
Well, I'm French. My wife is Italian. We're foodies like you cannot believe, and as you well know, and you and I literally send pictures of food we've made and or are eating all the time. So I guess we're all foodies, but we know on Wednesday what we're serving on Friday, and we're putting it together. Like I have what would be my father in the faith coming on Shabbat, but you have to chop an entire head of garlic. So that's already been chopped, sauteed in oil, and sitting in a glass container waiting for him. Because when he comes, I'm going to dump it in a pan, throw the beans and tomatoes in, and you run Italian bread with this with a glass of wine. Amazing. But like all the work is done, but the meal is there. So Tina and I do that for Friday. But I'm getting the wine ready. One of us is doing this appetizer thing, and suddenly we're eating and drinking, and we didn't get to praying yet. And I would like to reverse that, where we I don't know. I really don't know the right way. Perhaps the eating and the glass of wine and the food is more like entree into Shabbat, and the prayer would be legitimate after. What do you think?
This is great because I feel like me and Christelle have also had different perspectives on this, and I do not like I really really want to start Shabbat with a prayer because to me it's like setting the tone for the rest of the evening. And for me, when I sit down, like I want that to be the start of Shabbat. And it's really hard for me to like wait. And even to the point where Christelle's like, she's hungry, the kids are like ready to go. And she's like, are you really gonna pray like a 5 minute prayer right now? It's not always 5 minutes, but it's like I want that to be intentional. And so I mean this we even had this conversation 2 weeks ago at this point. And it was really helpful because I'm like, this is really important to me. And we just kind of talk through it. And I like to start with that mindset. So she's committed to like come along with me, where this is something that's important. And I'm trying to make it also enjoyable for the kids. So like I include them in the prayers we pray. I pray over them and make it really intentional where they're something that they're looking forward to. And for us that's been working. And I love it.
It's very interesting, marriage in this context, because if you were her girlfriend and she was saying, "Oh my God, John wants to pray," and he goes on and on. The thing is burning on the stove. The kid just dropped the glass, and the baby needs her diapers changed. It's like, no, I'm not feeling this, and it's like
Right.
you can really understand how she's feeling.
Totally. But
And we said this last time. It's the kid in the diapers. No one's controlling that, but it's really about prep. It's 4 o'clock. It's coming at 5. We need to wind down that we can pray in peace.
Right.
And I mean, if you don't mind my saying this, I have lived in your shoes actually, but I'm not in your shoes right now. I would tend to pray with my wife first and tell the kids we're going to pray. Death is the alternative to bothering us. so pray with my wife the way I'd like to pray over my lover, my wife, pray over her life, something magnificent before the Lord. And then I would tend to pray over the kids individually, so there's not a circus going on.
Totally.
But and perhaps I could be wrong. I really could be wrong here. It's just, this is this whole experiment thing. I probably would pray with my wife, have the wine and the appetizers, and then we're all chill. Everyone's eating, and then pray over my kids one at a time.
Yeah.
Because
that would work too.
They've eaten. They're not wild. And if you stole 10 minutes with your wife for prayer, they survived. Now it's an hour. Yeah, I just don't see that working. So
right.
To me, it's like, how can I sow the beauty of this into my family without making it religious? And oh my God, he's praying.
Totally. Well, I think what you said to begin with is spot on, because the moments when it's been very stressful is when we haven't prepared very well. And that's when it's like, yeah, my wife's in a bad spot, the kids are hangry, the house is still a wreck, and it doesn't feel restful. And so we've had to kind of work our way back to, okay, what's the root cause here? Oh, we're not starting to clean the house early enough in the day, or we just aren't preparing. And so all of that shift in intentionality can make a big difference in that. And I think that's really important.
Well, in my opinion, the onus is on you.
Yep.
At 2 o'clock to be thinking about it, 3 o'clock to be executing.
Yep.
You, the covering of the household is protecting Shabbat by bringing order.
Right.
Like when we're getting ready, a man's "I'll be home in 5 minutes" is the same as a woman's "I'll be ready in 5 minutes."
Right.
And when we're getting ready, I will always say 5-minute warning, meaning like my wife is thinking I'm taking forever. I'm not. I'm going to be done. I may still have no clothes on, but they're ironed and laid in the bed, sock, shoes, underwear. Like those will be on in like 60 seconds. So I'll give a 5-minute warning just so that I'm not saying to anybody, all right, I'm ready. And no
Right.
one's ready. Like so I think for you to say, you know what you're after, you know how beautiful it is, you know that the gift you're trying to bring to your family. Well, okay, then own it. Like
Yeah.
it's 3:00. Loic, pick up that mess, and you yourself are engaging in pulling it together. And if Christelle were cooking, like it's 4:00, is there anything you need help with?
Yes. Yeah.
Or
That makes
and
a big difference.
yeah, and then and if it doesn't work, I don't even think it's an opportunity to lay down and die. I say, where was the failure point?
Right.
It was this. Okay, well, next week I'll be on that too. And then suddenly people say, well, they just do Shabbat so well. That's easy for them. No, it wasn't easy. These are all choices.
You should have seen the last 5 years building up to this moment.
Yeah. So,
Y-
I find your soul to be so beautiful. You cannot grow old and not have attained what you wanted in Shabbat. And if you were the reason you got to have this beautiful place and then give it to your family, it's worth whatever it's costing you at 3:00 on a Friday.
I 100% agree with that. I'm even starting to see the fruit of it now, where before it was always like a struggle for a season as my kids were a little bit younger. But I realized that the more consistent we got about how we approach Shabbat, they
Right.
they understood it. They came along
Yeah.
with us.
Yeah.
And to the point now where they're like quieter than they used to be. They're more engaged than they were. I get them
Yeah.
to get one of them to say one of the words in a prayer I'm praying or a verse I'm reading. And
Yeah.
it's so great. And it's just nice to see that. And I really do hope that as they get older and start their own families, that this will be something that they look back on with fondness and remember like the good times we had and the heart posture towards God as we did this over and over.
Yeah. That book, How to Pray by Peter Gregg, he says they spin some landline phone. I guess it's portable. And whoever it points to, quote unquote, gets the privilege of saying grace and asking anyone at the table anything they want. And I'm thinking that feels very much like what you're talking about with what you've tried to achieve, what you are achieving in your family. Like the kid wants to be the one who says the prayer over the wine or the bread or the whatever, because
Right.
it's considered an honor to do that. It's a point of clout, really. And wowee, to instill a little kid with that sense of engaging Yahweh in such a way that, I got to pray the prayer this week, and I'm the one who approached the Lord God on this day. Oh
Right.
my, what a gorgeous gift to give kids growing up.
It is. We will say the Shema often in our family.
Yes.
And it's been so fun to watch. Even my 2.5-year-old, she knows the words to the Shema. And it's so amazing just to see them like light up and lean into all of these things that we're doing.
That is absolutely beautiful. It reminds me the baby in The Simpsons pulling out her that little thing and saying the Shema, because at this age she's already like, that's the image that comes right to my mind, is that kid.
Yeah, that's what it feels like.
Oh my, and that little girl is adorable. Yours little girl, by the way.
So great.
Not the Simpsons. But yeah, I think I think we've discussed it thoroughly enough.
Yeah, I think this is great. It was good getting into some of the details on Shabbat.
Yeah, I'm moving towards 6 to 6. Because in South Florida in the winter, it'll never put me in a position where it's dark and I'm not celebrating Shabbat. It's going to put me in a position where I start early sometimes, half the year. But I don't know if I'd be able to make the leap to celebrate it late on purpose.
Right.
I have celebrated late by my own stupidity, but not on purpose. And so I think I'm going with 6 to 6 from here on out, intentionally by decision. So
well, you can try it out in just a few hours.
Yes,
we can talk about it next week.
Yep. Tonight we're having Romanian grilled eggplant blended with peppers and onions and some Romanian spices. My neighbor made it.
That sounds delicious.
Lovely. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So that's it.
Awesome.
I'm saying that's it because it's 11 o'clock and I'm thinking.
Oh, yeah. Look at that. Our time is up. This is good. Wow. Thanks for listening to the Ancient Way podcast, where our work is made possible by generous supporters like you. To find more podcasts and free resources, we invite you to visit theancientway.org. See you next time.